Hello and welcome to the Sales SOS podcast live on LinkedIn. We are here today, me and your Sales SOS podcast crew. And today we're talking about tracking progress. And while we're here today, we're going to do 4 episodes of the Sales SOS podcast with you folks here with us live. And so bear with us as we break between topics. If you want to join us, if you want to share something with us, please send us notes and we will add what you are asking us or commenting into our conversation. All right. So here we go. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Daryl Prell, Mike Simmons, and Renee Bigelow. And today we're talking about keeping your team on track. How do you know if your sales team's on track or not? I mean, I think a lot of times when I talk to folks, when I talk to leaders, they're like, yeah, I think we're on track. I think we're doing great. And then they're not. Your team's not on track and it's a surprise. And in the world of sales, that's the worst surprise. The worst surprise you can have is I thought we were on track. I thought we were hitting our numbers and we're not going to. So I think one of the things that gets us in trouble is KPIs. So we set up these KPIs, these key performance indicators, or whatever other term you want to use, OKRs, whatever it is that you want to use. We set these up. We call them the measures of success, and they're not really measuring what we need them to measure. So let's talk a little bit about why do you suppose that happens? Why is it that we get so off track with some of our KPIs?
I'll start with one.
I was waiting for Renee to start. I knew she was going to be all over this one.
Well, there's a term I use for it called borrowed metrics. I'm sure other people are using the same thing, but at least on the marketing side, and that's going to be the beginnings of your pipeline, right? Like the early stages of a buyer's journey are going to be in your marketing metrics, and those connect to your sales metrics. But people are often using what I call borrowed metrics, meaning they're using numbers that they're hearing or reading about that are very applicable to other organizations, but don't work for their organization. It either doesn't match the scale, it doesn't match the maturity, it doesn't match their own buyer journey versus someone else's buyer journey. And that is a number one like KPI sin that I see, is that people are using borrowed metrics. I'll give you an example of I was working with a client that has a customer base of about 100 to 125 and a TAM of probably about 1,000. And they wanted to A/B test a bunch of their sales emails. And the lists were broken down from that 125 to about 25 to 35 people. So like they're doing the things that they've heard are great measurements for success, trying to get to a KPI of an email metric that they were working toward, but it didn't work for them because their market, their consumer, their base, everything was all different. So that's just one example of borrowed metrics.
So in other words, just because somebody else is measuring it doesn't mean you should be measuring that.
Yeah, does it match your business? Does it match your market? Does it match your buyer journey? Does it match your goals?
I think before we go further, I think this idea of does it match your buyer journey is super important, right? If you are measuring things that don't align with the way your buyer buys, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. And we can talk more about that later, but it doesn't matter what your sales process is. It doesn't matter what you think your salespeople should be doing. If it doesn't align with how your buyers buy, it's a KPI, it's a measurement, it's a tracking mechanism that just doesn't matter. Daryl, did you have something for us?
I mean, I've got lots of opinions based on experience. I always giggle when the question is, how do we know we're doing the right stuff? And there's so much noise on this front, right? Because it depends. If I'm working with a company that's in a startup mode and it's young and it's run by somebody who's like 30 years old versus I'm running in maybe a scale up. It's run by somebody who's 50 years old. The 30-year-old versus the 50-year-old has very different life experiences. Some have gone through the demand waterfall. They understand MQLs and SQLs. The 30-year-old doesn't know what the demand waterfall is, right? So you bring a lot of baggage. And there's a lot of people telling you what to measure. And that's the challenge, is what I'm getting at. It's based on your life experiences, what's worked, what's not. For me, I always had to ask a couple things. I like to do the so what. So what? You're measuring something, so what? How does that matter? Does it affect revenue? Does it affect retention? Talk to me. If it doesn't, then so what? Said another way, is it actionable? If the figure dropped tomorrow, would you know what levers to pull to physically go and react to it? So there's a lot of metrics you can cover. By the end of the day, the key words here are key performance indicators. So is it actionable? Is it an indicator? And if you saw the indication change, would you know what to do? Is there a so what? If I got 30 MQLs versus 10 MQLs, so what? But if I knew that based on my historical funnel, 30 MQLs meant I was going to close one deal, okay, now it means something. So that's kind of where I like to start. And the last thing I like to do is, and this sounds silly, but this is just based on me being more than 50 years old, how are you personally, individually compensated? Or how are key people on your term compensated? Because if there is a variable component to that, you got to measure those metrics to make sure you or your colleagues have a chance to hit that. So it sounds silly, but good people are hard to find. You want to retain them. You want to help them succeed. You got to measure the right stuff so they can make sure they get the variable component. Because after all, they built the compensation structure to incentivize you to achieve a certain outcome. So the KPIs better reflect that so you can monitor it. So that's my take. Oh, and Brenda's in the house, so she's going to.
Brenda's in the house. Sorry about my distraction there. I kept letting Brenda in, and she kept disappearing.
Yeah.
It happens everywhere in my life. I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. I'm happy to be here.
She's got commitment issues. So there we go.
Is that what it was? I thought it was me with the problem.
It's usually the customer with the commitment issues, but
I understand that well. Yeah.
Yeah. So fill me in on the question.
All right. So we were talking about KPIs and measurement, and how do we know if our team's on track, and are we measuring the right things to get us there? And Renee talked about borrowing KPIs from other companies that maybe aren't relevant for yours. And then Terrell talked about a couple different things, but part of it is the so what, right? The so what of it. You're measuring this. Does it really matter? Is it what you really need to be measuring? And if you know about that measurement, what are you going to do with it? Which leads us into Mike so beautifully, because Mike is always talking to us about the so what.
It's the whiteboard guy, everybody.
It's the whiteboard. He's got no whiteboard. Mike, how are we going to do this with no whiteboard today? Can you write on the...
I could actually have markers, so we could write on the glass and do the whole Nash thing from Beautiful Mind.
Mike has, I just have to tell you that Mike has joined us from Waikiki today, and he's so committed to you and to us that he is here sharing his wisdom without his whiteboard.
But a really good tan.
Yeah.
Bad tan line though with all the golf. Like that's the thing. That's going to be the funny part. Is I'm going to go out here and I'm going to look like a tourist who doesn't usually get around the sun.
That's because you're a tourist. So there you go.
I'm usually around the sun. To build on Daryl's piece around the so what, and I know we've talked about this before, but there's a reflective model called the Rolf reflective model, ROLFE, Rolf reflective model. And the first question is what? That's definition. So what are we talking about? The next question is so what? That's the why does it matter? And then the third one is now what? What are we actually going to do with it? And if you can't answer those three questions, then the metric or the process or the stage or the whatever or the tool doesn't earn a right in the discussion from my perspective. The biggest mistake that I see people make when it comes to KPIs is a piece that we've been talking about here, which is there's no connection to actual performance. They're reporting on shit just for the sake of reporting on it. The second biggest mistake that I see happen is they sit in a dashboard that shows a number that's kind of like showing the temperature. It says what it is right now, not what it's been or how it's moved over time or how it's changed over years. So we lack definition, we lack visibility, and we lack changes over time. And if you can solve for those kind of things, then you'll be on a better path. As far as so that's how I look at this stuff, even without a whiteboard.
So, okay, so let's go back to that for just a second. Hang on, Brent.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things are we measuring that don't matter? Like that don't really tell you whether you're making momentum or whether
Number of calls, activity.
Come on, that's the most important KPI.
Number of downloads.
Yeah.
Number of downloads.
In what context? When you compare numbers across different groups, like Renee was talking about, then and you want to follow certain benchmarks because Aaron Ross said this is what you need in predictable revenue. Based on what? Based on which players? Based on which car? Based on which customer base? Based on which operating environment? There's just so many different ways that piece can go. The challenge that we have today is it's so easy to report on everything. Like you can literally report on anything and everything, and we are just overfed with data but starved for information.
And of course, I was just joking that was the most important measure because it seems like a lot of CEOs think it is, but Mike's right? So in any given environment, with the people that you have, the number of calls may or may not have any meaning at all. Now, if you have an SDR team and all they do all day long is sit and dial, then the number of dials matters, but not nearly as much as the number of people that answer or the number of people that they have a conversation with, right? So, but if you don't dial and you're an SDR, then you will never have any results.
Liz, one other thing, your original question, like, how do I know if we're on track? There was one top thing that came to mind that I see in CRMs all the time that is the wild part of the wild guess that I see applied often in pipeline metrics. Somebody somewhere, when they set up the CRM, determines each stage is a percent likelihood, right?
Yeah.
And that is like an arbitrary number most times when people are setting that up. And so when people are looking at that beautiful dashboard with all the different stages and the percent likelihood that they're going to close, that percent is often wildly inaccurate. It's a number that was often determined when the CRM was set up versus based on other data. So that's the one I would say I see regularly throwing off. Where are we really?
It throws off forecasting too, because we're assuming that if we're talking to this person, that there's a 60% chance it's going to close is ridiculous.
So I think there's a couple of important things about this, and I'm going to jump in here because this is one of the things that I spent a lot of time on. So one is you need a starting point. Throw in a metric to start with because you don't know what it is. But it's not going to be a permanent metric. After 6 months or a year or 2 years or every 6 months or whatever that time frame is, you need to go back and look at that. Is that what really happens? Is what the actual data says that's a percentage? The other thing I often have my clients do is to have 2 percentage numbers. One is the metadata, right? This is if I have 30 sales reps and we have this much in each stage, then we can estimate for the entire company what it might look like, right? If I don't have enough things in each stage, I probably have a problem because if I've figured out what that statistic is, then I should be able to say, as a team, this is where we will be. But what happens with the sales reps themselves is they look at that number and it makes them lie. right? Because there's only a 20% chance this is going to close. I can't move it to best view or closing or whatever it is, but it is ready to close, but I'm not going to win it. So either you got to take it out, or you have to give the sales rep the ability to say, this isn't really an 80% or 90% chance of winning. It's a 20% chance of winning.
Yeah. It's that override with like the actual empirical data.
But don't override it. Don't change the meta number. Just change. So you give them two different numbers. One is metadata that happens in the background. The salesperson never needs to see it. The other is the estimate that they get to change. Otherwise, you're measuring two different things in each of those. And this is the statistician in my brain talking, right? So you never want to, you have a metadata and you have a personal data, and they're two different things.
So I'm going to, that's one of the last points that I have is real good KPIs need to be honest, not vanity, right? And that I think is really important, that we are rewarding our sales reps for telling us when there's a low percentage of closure, because we want to know the truth. We don't want it to be, an attaboy kind of thing. I just want to share, relatively recently, I was training a bank with 100 bankers, and it was done in broken up into four different training classes. But one of the classes, when like the top banker guy walks in, right? He's got the shiniest shoes and the tightest tie, and everyone kind of looks, he's the popular kid, right? Like you just know when he walks in the room. And so I always look at those folks as having a lot of influence on the team because they seem to be influential. 7 minutes into the training, he's like, excuse me. And I said, yeah. He goes, what is management looking at? We're here to teach you how to prospect better using LinkedIn. And he doesn't want to know, how do I mine my connections better? How do I find pathways into my prospects? How do I do this so I can do my job better and close more business and have more loans? He was solely interested, or primarily interested for sure, in what his one-on-one is going to look like and if he's going to get a gold star in his paper. And I went, this institution is so far off course that I don't even know what we do can bring value, because they're not willing to move their KPIs. So let me go through. I just wanted to share, there's a culture around this too. It's not just here are the right numbers, but it's the culture. What do we want from our people? So I'm just going to run through kind of the way I look at this. Great KPIs measure outcome, not activity.
Yeah.
Right? It has to. Now, are there KPIs that we want to measure along the way? Sure, but they're not the ones that matter. I want to know the KPI, and your outcome could be, we had a discovery call. That's an outcome. We can back in, how did we get there? But some sales reps get their cold calling. Some sales reps get there from getting warm introductions from their clients. And by the way, there's a lot less work around that, but there's more relationship-driven conversations, right? Some will do it through MQLs. I just love to work the leads that come in through marketing. And all of them may be fine based on the ability of that sales rep. But we have to look at, for me, when someone says, what's the success of the LinkedIn program implementation? Success is more discovery calls with the right people. I get you to hello, right? So to me, that's the outcome. Now, a sales trainer will come in and say, that is just the beginning, right? We've got to take you all the way through. But the other thing is, because it's based on measuring the outcome, we also have to make sure that it is specific enough to act on. That KPI needs to be so clear that it's actionable. Right? We can't have a KPI. So you can have a KPI that says, you have to hit 120 dials today. That's act upon, but that's not outcome driven. So, they build on each other. They have to be tied to a time frame, in my opinion. If you have KPIs without a time frame, then they're just sort of out there floating, right? So we want to hit these outcomes this week, this month, this quarter. Because if you just have KPIs with no time frame, it's kind of like random acts of KPIs, right? Like, I think it's really important. The next one is they absolutely have to be owned by someone. That rep has to be able to own that KPI, right? If the KPI, you can have group data numbers as a group, we have to hit this but each rep needs to own their KPI. I think it's really important. They also need few enough KPIs that they can focus on it. Because if there are too many, then, and they're not, especially if they're not prioritized, we end up doing the wrong activities, the wrong things, and we don't get the outcome we're looking for. So I would rather have 3 or 5 KPIs that a rep needs to focus on, that they can really just, put the right energy behind, than 20 KPIs that just get ignored. Right?
So I want to circle back. Because remember how I open it up? I mean, I feel like Bryn just said the same thing. I said, is it actionable? But the other thing I said is, what portion of your variable compensation, how is that being measured? How's that being determined? This bank sales rep wanted to know how they were being tracked in the meetings. Same concept. The meetings, the compensation structure drives the behavior you want. So if you want to achieve a certain outcome, exactly as Bryn said, the KPIs have to be not just something you talk about, not just something on a Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever dashboard. It's got to be something that's in the compensation plan, in the meetings, everything else. And I love Bryn's point. There's got to be just a finite number that are actually I can deal with and cope with, which comes back to, is it actionable? If you keep the stuff actionable, that's brilliant. But too many people do not understand the consequences of the comp plans, of how the meetings are held as it relates to KPIs. Biggest issue I see over and over again.
Awesome.
Mike, do you have something for us? No, I want to go online. Jim commented. He said that, let's see, opportunity calls in a call center, calls closed, dispatch calls, run calls, connect with customer face-to-face, in-home, yes, no, converted calls, percent hours sold, measure these KPIs. It's that easy. So it sounds like that's an inbound environment, right, Jim, that you're talking about, where you're in a call center and calls are coming in. I'm not sure. How do I find it?
Yeah, Jim hasn't followed up yet with the comments.
Okay.
But I think what they're pointing out to is, for Jim, these are the things that he's thinking needs to be tracked, right?
And
Which
I
is
think it's
interesting.
important, right? Different places, different environments, different measures. Right, Daryl?
Well, if you go back and say, is this actionable, right? And that's one of the things, what's the so what? So if it's a call center, how many opportunity calls or calls closed? Okay, which is interesting. The calls closed, I get that. Connect with customer, yeah. But again, connect with customer could be like a discovery, same concept, that's actionable. Hours sold. That's a metric. I don't know if it's actionable.
Interesting.
What do you think, folks? If you get an opinion, what Jim's point of view here is on the comments, on the tracking, agree, disagree, don't be shy. Share the comments.
Here's what I would add to what Jim has on here. Jim, look at each of these and say, which of these KPIs are either leading, lagging, or converting. And when you look at it, and remember, a leading indicator for one group may be a lagging indicator for another. That's okay. That's typically where you get into some of these converting pieces. But just label leading, lagging, or converting. And then from there, you can start to determine, is there potentially a way that you simplify some of these numbers? Like, are you potentially over-reporting? I'm a big fan. I know Daryl or Bren said 3 to 5. I'm a big fan of 3. If you need more than 3 KPIs for your specific role, then the role is probably too complicated. If you need more than 3 KPIs for your team, then you probably have different roles inside that team, so that can start to make a little bit more sense. But there's 3 from your team that will roll out to the next team, and if you have more than 3 for your organization, then you're going to have some level of risk. Those can all nest underneath each other, so you can use 3x3 modeling to work your way all the way down, but no more than 3. And I like to have 1 leading, 1 lagging, and 1 converting. I don't know which of these would be those for your specific role and your function. But that's the question I would ask.
And I meant to bring that up. So I'm glad you did the leading, lagging, converting, because those are very different indicators, right? Lagging is what we tend to do, which makes it really hard to know. Makes it hard to respond fast enough if you're in a very dynamic, tight timeline to affect change. So you still need lagging, but you also need leading. And, there's signs if you're tracking in the right direction or not. And give that a strong consideration when you're asking yourself the question, do my KPIs measure the right things? I know, for example, in the world of training, right? I take training ideally to improve customer service or whatever it might be. But if I have to wait, a year to see how did our customer service improve after the year, even though the training was 6 months ago, what's the point? So that's a good example of leading indicators being a good indication of if we're on the right path. You need both.
So Daryl, one of the pushbacks hang on a sec, Mike. One of the pushbacks that we get though is, but number of calls is a leading indicator. And you just told me not to do that, right?
Is it actionable? So, if I had, for example, I use the example of a year, but if I had, they did 25% more calls this week than last week, did I get 25% more discoveries? There's an element of that. In the middle of the week, okay, you're doing 25% more calls for the last 2 days, only 2 days. Are you getting more connects? Are you having more conversations? Some might argue that's lagging. I would argue that's leading because you haven't had enough volume of data, sample size to actually make an assessment, but you are monitoring it.
Okay, Mike, can I cut you off?
This is that whole "are we making progress" thing, and this is a good way to, in my mind, and most of the stuff I say in my mind is good, but so this is the way that I would look at this. Pipeline created is a leading indicator for potential sales or pipeline developed. Sales is typically looked at as a lagging indicator. Closed won business is a lagging indicator for your sales team, but it's a leading indicator for revenue that's going to be recognized inside your business. So typecasting it as a leading or lagging indicator based on the view that you have in your business is useful for you, but someone else in your business may have a different view on that same indicator and look at it as something that's a little bit different, which is where these converting pieces come in. So be clear about what you're calling things, what the job to be done is, and ultimately, as a result, what are you going to do with the data? What kind of changes are you going to make? But pipeline created is a lagging indicator from general outreach. It's a leading indicator for pipeline developed. Pipeline developed is a leading indicator for revenue and potential profit in your business. just know which lens you're looking at it through. And because someone says it's one thing, that doesn't mean that it isn't that one thing for them. It can be both inside the same organization. And it's one of those things that a lot of people get hung up on and miss on, because they own that number. That's my indicator. I won't use bad language, but there you go.
All right. Any last thoughts on how do I know if my team is on track, and are my KPIs helping me figure that out before we wrap up? Okay. So just to reiterate, measure the right things. Measure the things that are going to get you where you want to go. Think about leading versus lagging indicators. What's telling me where I'm going as opposed to where I've been. Make sure that that it's doable and that you have a time frame around it. If I have to make 1,000 phone calls and I wait until the last week of the year to make those 1,000 phone calls because you didn't give me if they weren't bounded, you're going to have chaos. So measurable, manageable, and that they actually are measuring progress, that they're doable. These are all important things when we're thinking about our KPIs. But the KPI is just a number, right? What really matters is how are we looking at the data and how are we using that with our team? One, to indicate, to know whether they're on track, and two, then to do something about it if they're not on track. All right. That wraps up this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Thanks, team. Okay. Our next topic is going to be, is everyone measuring progress the same way? All right.
This is going to be a rock star topic for Renee. I'm just going to shut up and listen and learn.
Right. All right. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Daryl Prell, Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and Brent Tillman. And today we're talking about how do I know if my team is on track? And it's too late when you're in November to worry about whether or not your team is on track. Here we are. Today is May 8th, as we're recording this, and it's already time to start looking at whether or not your team is on track. In our last episode, we talked about KPIs, but now let's talk about how do you know if everybody is measuring the same thing in the same way? How do we know if everyone is making progress based upon the way they're talking to us or the numbers that we're seeing? So I don't know who wants to start. Renee, do you want to lead off on this one?
Sure. I'll start with just kind of an overview to maybe guide us for the beginning of the conversation. But I think it's really important to have one overarching goal that everybody is focused on, and an understanding of why to that goal. And then there are departmental goals that contribute to that goal. And then there are data points underneath that are probably measured, monitored, acted upon, but they may not be the KPI that moves to success based on the current goal. Does that make sense? I think you need those three layers essentially. You can't just measure on marketing leads, right? If you want to use the old MQL, SQL kind of measurement, because you can easily leverage ways to drive more marketing leads that don't lead to sales. There are a number of ways you could do that, right? So you can have that as a department goal, but it needs to be connected to if the overall goal is a revenue number, or if the overall goal is adoption, or whatever those things are. It needs to be connected to those so that whatever leads you're driving are moving in the same direction as the other team who's going to pick it up with. If it's product, that you're tying your leads, your marketing leads, into the things that the product team is developing. If it's sales, to the things that they're telling you that they need in order for someone to be more likely to convert, in order to have a good lead, right? All of those things. So if everybody has one, that they're all focused on, and then you have departmental goals that connect to those. Then underneath that, you have a lot of data points that you would be measuring, doing. There are a ton of things that you can measure in marketing. There's so many things that you can measure. That doesn't mean that all of them are things that are the things that you need to be reporting externally. They are things that can help you do your job better, but they aren't KPI worthy, if that makes sense. So I'll get that started and let the rest of you chime in.
So yeah, go ahead, Bryn. Were you going to say something?
I think I'm challenged with the question and exactly how that fits in. That's just my limitation. But the way that I'm interpreting this or hearing this is, how do we know if they're successful? We have to make sure first that the KPIs are aligned with each of what the rep is expected to do, right? And so I think the success is, are we getting the outcome that the goal originally expected we'd get or close to it? That is the only thing, generally I can think about. How do we measure success of these KPIs is if we're meeting our goals.
Well, let's back up for a second, because I think one of the things that really matters is language, right? So the first one that Renee talked about was conversion, marketing conversion versus qualified leads, right? So if marketing gets a whole bunch of clicks and a whole bunch of forms filled out and all of these things happen, but they aren't qualified, and we don't share a descriptor or a definition with sales about what a qualified lead is, then marketing says, we gave sales this many qualified leads, and sales says, we didn't get any qualified leads because we weren't using the same language to describe what we needed. Marketing was measuring it one way, sales was measuring it another. So we may think we're making momentum, but sales is like, well, there were a bunch of leads, but they weren't qualified.
Another piece of that, Liz, is the timeline, the horizon for both, right? So a good marketing lead could be a great sales lead, but it's going to have a different timeline, right? So just because someone's interested now doesn't mean they're ready to close. And interested now is a great marketing lead. Not the right time is still a good marketing lead. It's just not going to show up in this quarter's sales number possibly. So that goes to your part of what is a good lead, right, is part of the definition. But when I talk about that overarching goal, if it's we need things that are, we have to close more business in this quarter, then that's a different playbook. Like, we have an emergency. We really need, you may have this with a startup. Your run rate may be dwindling down. There are lots of reasons you could have a pressure put on, and that definition married to the horizon, what does that mean for the whole company, right, is where that alignment has to come in.
I think another place where we have this language issue is around a closed deal. You ask the sales rep verbally, is it closed? And they say yes. Maybe they've moved it to closed in the CRM, but what they got was a verbal approval. They didn't get signed paperwork, right? So that's another obvious place where they may have moved it in the CRM, but it isn't really closed. You didn't have a check, you didn't have a contract, you didn't have whatever really makes it closed. So if I'm measuring closed deals and we are talking about it using two different definitions, then how on track we are is different depending upon who's talking about it. Mike, it looks like you have a thought.
I was just going to say, in your example, Liz, the customer success team likely can't onboard until the contract is sent in. So you've got somebody living in no man's land in between. Oh no, we're saying it's closed. They give us a verbal, and no good onboarding process. A bad experience in onboarding because somebody else is sitting over here waiting on a contract because we didn't have alignment. That's that alignment for everyone on what each thing means.
Mike, were you going to say something? Oh, go ahead, Daryl.
I'll jump in. Sorry, Mike. I love you, Mike. So I'll go a different route, but related. So that is the key question here is everyone measuring progress the same way? And that's the real wild card. So to me, if you want to get everyone measuring the same way, across the entire organization, not just marketing or sales, which are the ones who tend to always get measured the most. You know,
Yes.
the developers rarely get measured in B2B SaaS, as an example. And same for the admin staff, is you need an actual company-wide system. Now, two popular ones on this, which are great because measurements are core to what they do, is the Google approach of OKRs. What's the objective and what's the key result? Or is the other approach of the EOS, the Enterprise Operating System. Both of them have metrics built into them. On OKRs, it's quarterly, sometimes with stretch goals. And EOS, there's weekly scorecards as well as 90-day rocks you want to achieve, big goals. But the point being is it starts at the top, and the head honcho, the CEO, whomever, says, this is the goal we want to achieve this quarter. And to Renee's point, when you start working through the organization, two things happen. One, whatever you're putting down for your OKRs, for example, is to do support the goals above you, as well as some of your own goals that you think your department may need that may not be in line with the goals above you, but still critical to you, and so on and so forth. So if the thing here is we want everyone measuring progress the same way, you need a system throughout the whole thing. Otherwise, it just becomes opinion. And whoever's got the biggest bluster and the strongest personality will usually shout out the others.
And if you want to use a real system that works, that's battle tested and has demonstrated success inside organizations, you build out your game plan with me. And it's the challenge with a lot of these systems is they struggle with connecting the dots between the goal and the work that's being done. So a lot of them will give you these to-do lists of, hey, I've got all these things that I have to do, all this work that I'm doing, and there's the missing connection between the work and the objective. And that connection ends up happening around an aligned strategy that we have as a team. And if you've ever driven your car and it's been out of alignment, you feel it pulling one way or the other. Or you ever have a conversation with someone at a dinner table and your vocabulary is out of alignment, you identify more friction in the discussion. And when you have that unnecessary friction inside your business or inside your car or inside your household, you create wear and tear on either of those three things: the vehicle, the relationship, the stuff that's going on inside your business. And that's where this alignment piece is so critical. We'll talk about it and we'll say that we're aligned, but people struggle with going in and asking the really hard question of, are we aligned? I shared this experience in a video that I pushed live today on LinkedIn. I had there was a member of an engineering team with a company that I was doing work with a number of years back. And when we were talking about the goals, the broader goals and objectives of the business, she had a hard time seeing how her work directly aligned with the goals that we were reporting on in the all hands meetings. And she said it in one of the all hands meetings, that I don't see how what I'm doing right now directly connects with it. And that turned into an instance where we attempted to implement the game plan, and somebody, because they read Doerr's book, determined that OKRs would be better because it's a known process that's out there. And ultimately what ended up happening was we ran into the same level of disconnect. One of the biggest challenges with OKRs is many of the people who talk about them have not read the book. And the question that you ask in any operating environment that you're in when someone's implementing OKRs, ask them, how long has the leadership team implemented these inside the business? And if you read Doerr's book, the expectation that's set is that the leadership team should have implemented OKRs for a period of at least 6 months before rolling them out across the business. But most people read the headline or the back cover and think this is going to be the magical thing that's going to solve it. And it's not going to solve your problem, whether it's EOS or OKRs or MBOs or Mind or any of the other ones that are out there, other than the game plan, because it works and you know a guy who can help you implement it. And the beauty, they're too often people walk away with a very different perspective of I've talked about this before on these calls, what was said, what was heard, and what was remembered. And as a result, you end up having people thinking that they are all talking about something and aligned on the thing, but they're not. And I know it's inconceivable, and that's my go-to joke from The Princess Bride anytime this happens. But people use these words but don't know what they mean. So just ask that question if OKRs come up. Alignment's critical, because without alignment, you create unnecessary friction. And when the business gets hard, the friction will create risk inside your business. Your business lacks integrity, and that structure will fail. So ask yourself that question: are we aligned? And then kind of work through the details of what that really means and show it, because you should be able to connect each of those dots all the way through the business. It's hard to connect the dot from Z to A, really hard. But if you go back through each of the individual letters, you should see how those all connect with each other. And if they are not connected, then your area of focus becomes really, really clear. We make this much more complicated than it needs to be. And a lot of times it's because of language, preconceived notions, agendas, and comp plans.
The challenge, or I'll push back a little bit on you.
Push back.
I love your point. It's spot on. What was said, what was heard, what was taken away. That will exist whether you have a system in place or not. So it's not a system issue. It's a leadership issue in that case.
It's okay, so when you think about systems, what do systems do? Functionally,
In
what's
the example of EOS or OKRs, it's designed to get alignment, to your point. It's also designed to have discussion, right? So if I use OKRs, and by the way, I'll be clear on this. I'm not advocating for one system over another. What I'm advocating for is a system. But to your point, I think what it does is it starts the discussion. Okay, so using an OKR, I propose as the CEO, this is our objective. We want to reduce our sales cycle by 10%, increase our sales velocity. Why? That should be the discussion. How do we measure it? What are the key results? Are those actually key results, or are those just, stupid bullshit KPIs that we talked about in the last episode? That's what should be happening. The system should get alignment so that you avoid what was said, what was heard, and what was taken, what they remember. The reality is, and I agree with you, too many people don't do that. Hence the point you're making: they read the front, they read the back, they think they know what they're doing, they don't follow the system at all. That's poor leadership. So that's an example. I go back in the conversation I heard earlier in the last episode. I said, is your CEO a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old? Because the leadership's going to be very different because of life experiences.
So this happens to be an area where I have both deep expertise and experience. So I that's where I'm and I think the pushback is really important. One of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves in these leadership meetings when we're involved in the conversation is, what is your definition of a system? What is the job to be done of the system? Let's align on it. A system is a combination of process and tools. That's the system. Now, there's also resources that get pulled into that system. And an operating system like Entrepreneur Operating System, EOS, or OKRs, or MBOs, management-based objectives, balanced scorecards, they've all been around for a while. You have these systems that ideally help you allocate resources in the proper place so that you functionally use resources. Even your operating system on your computer does this. It puts resources in the right place. So let's align on what our definitions are to the point that we've been talking about, and then go in and make sure that the things, processes, tools, people, capital are allocated in the right way to achieve the result we want to. And know that throughout that allocation, there's going to be waste. There will be risk. There will be changes that happen. But we shouldn't make decisions based on opinions and assumptions. We should make decisions based on data that we have in front of us. And if you lack a system of record, processes, and tools in order to be able to make those decisions, then you're kind of just not much better than, finger in the air, my opinion, whatever. So yes, have a system. know what the job to be done of it is, have that clarity, and these conversations will get so much better, which is how you'll address the leadership challenge, which continues to persist across our organizations and all over the place. And it's so this is an important conversation to have. It is definitely a people challenge. It is definitely a resource challenge. It is definitely a process challenge. It is definitely a tool challenge. The hard part is if you try to solve for all of those at once, you're not going to solve for any of them.
High five. Totally agree. Well said.
So I want to back up for a second to this idea of everyone in leadership, which keeps coming up, right? Is everyone measuring the same thing in the same way? Is leadership leading in a way that is consistent and clear? And I think one of the things that I see happen a lot is that the team is in, let me back up, in a complex business to business sale where you have a long sales cycle as opposed to one where you have a short sales cycle. If leadership is focused on this week, this month, this quarter, if they're focused on what has to happen, what are our goals for this week, what are our goals for this quarter, are we on track for right now? Then you have this problem of, are you doing all of the things, and is anyone measuring or tracking that all of the things that have to happen on the early end of the sales and marketing cycle are happening? Or are we going to hit our goals this quarter, this month, and not next quarter or next month? And I think that it's important that, again, we're using the same language, we're talking about it in the same way, and we're looking at the full cycle. You need to have goals and KPIs and whatever measures for right now, but you also have to make sure that you haven't lost track of the momentum that needs to happen in order for you to have hit this quarter or next quarter or 3 quarters from now.
That's alignment around horizons, an agreement around horizons, right? Like, because not everything fits perfectly in a quarter, and not every team is working at the same horizon, right? The goal may be the same horizon for everybody, but there are other parts that don't always match. Liz, I might be setting us up perfectly for our next episode, but I also just want to say, because you said everyone and you highlighted that in your contribution just now, I also just want to point out that often that everyone is missing a very important voice. I'm sure you're going to be shocked at what I'm about to say, and that is the market. A lot of these goals and these top goals are set for internal decisions, and and a lot of times that's perfectly valid. You may have operational things that are the top things, right? The internal metrics that really do need to be addressed. But my number one frustration in sitting with, and I've had the pleasure, and I'll say pleasure, I could use other words, but I'll say pleasure because it gives me a lot of perspectives of working with everybody, with each of the systems basically that you've mentioned. And the number one lack that I find in most of them is when it comes time to set those overarching goals, is that the market doesn't have a voice in the room often. And the goal would be different if you were thinking about the market. So I think that probably tees us up for setting the right KPIs.
So for example, I want to shorten my sales cycle, but my buyers want more time, would not be understanding the market.
I mean, there are lots of things. Like if it's, there are often reasons. I generally do something called a brand experience audit, where you figure out where the friction and the momentum are in your business, right? That helps you figure that out. You may also have some proprietary research. You may have some data points that help you understand what the market is telling you. But often there are clues, and you can do audits and you can figure out, but doing those things will often increase your momentum much faster than these internal operational things. Again, there are times where operational efficiencies and things like that are critical because of other reasons. And you may choose those over what you get back from the market because the external outcome will benefit the customer better in the end. But an example may be if you're having a profitability issue and you know that you'll be able to keep the price where it is versus raise a price. That is something that a customer wouldn't be able to give you feedback on right now because they wouldn't know that that's what you're facing, right? So there are definitely times, but there are often times where customers would tell you, in other words, if it's a complex sale and their buying cycle is different or whatever, they may say, oh, but I could speed it up if, right? I could speed it up if this, like whatever those things are you arbitrarily slowing it down because you don't have pricing out there, because you don't have whatever other things that are out there that do slow down their buying process, right? And those are things where the market starts to have a voice.
So to back up what Renee said, I've lived this so many times, and it's so frustrating. Thank you for Renee bringing that up, because it's spot on. What I've seen is you've got VCs, you got private equity, you've got equity holders such as founders who are really trying to get to an exit, and they have a multiple in mind they want to do, and they're looking at the math, and they say we need to grow our revenue, 3x, and we need to get our EBITDA way the hell up. So we're not going to fund marketing, and I'm going to give everybody a mandate to grow at 100% when the market itself is only growing at 20%. And you're number 4 in the space by this, you're way the hell back there. That's not listening to the market. And yet you're making decisions galore to do exactly that. And what you end up doing is you going through massive churn on both your staff as well as your reputation for hiring and attracting new talent. It's crazy, but that's not listening to the market, and there's massive consequences. And that's what I see over and over and over again.
Daryl, to your point, like if you do that audit on your brand experience, one of the things you may find out is if staff turnover is causing account management problems and people are leaving because they don't have consistent account management, they don't know who to talk to, like your number one priority should be improving the employee experience. What are the things that we need to do to increase retention? And so that's the market speaking, even if it isn't an external goal, it is the market speaking, and it does have an external outcome. Does that make sense?
I think there's an interesting thing that falls out of that, which is I'm talking to a company that their sales cycle is about 18 months, and their salespeople are lasting 9 months.
Less than the cycle. Yeah.
And they have had 2 sales leaders in that 18-month period. Right. And so are you giving your team enough time to measure momentum before you eliminate them? Because if you're at the senior level expecting things to happen faster than is realistic, and you're eliminating your team because they're not closing deals fast enough, that don't close that fast because of the way the buying process happens, then you are undermining your ability to hit your own goals.
And that's a great way to turn an 18-month into a 24-month, because now they're starting over with someone else.
Or just lose it altogether because nobody's following up on it because it got handed to this person and that person and nobody knows what happened.
Anyway, this is why I added in this experience audit and trying to find a way to start getting the market voice, like the experience people are having with your brand, internal, external, into that room and into that conversation, because it's arbitrary. Just like Daryl gave the examples, we need growth. Here, go get these leads, more than it is, this is what the market and the demand is calling for.
All right. Any last thoughts before we wrap this up? Thanks, Renee. That brought it home for us. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Okay. Our next podcast topic is then what critical things have to happen in each stage. And we can put marketing stages and sales stages into this conversation. But like how do you measure momentum in the stages? And what are the things that stop momentum? Those are the things I'd like to chat about. Okay. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Daryl Prell, Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and Bryn Tillman. And today we're talking about how do you know if your team is on track? How do you measure progress toward your end goal? And how do you know if your team is actually getting there and if you're going to have surprises or not? In this episode, we want to talk specifically about in your sales and marketing stages, how do you know if you're actually making momentum? How do you measure the progress? What things actually have to happen in each stage in order for your deals to continue to have momentum and to move forward? And I know it's different products, different sales process, different length of time, and those things change. But what are the things we should be thinking about that need to happen in the different stages? And it doesn't matter what you call them. I'm going to give them names, but let's call them prospecting. Let's call it marketing, prospecting, qualifying, prospecting, solving, and closing. Those are the words I use. Mike would give different words. It doesn't matter, but we still basically are doing the same work, right? At one stage, we're marketing. That you could break into more than one. There's this part where you're prospecting as a salesperson. You're following up on leads that came from marketing. There's a part where you're deciding whether or not there's a fit. There's a part where you're writing proposals and you're following up on proposals and you're making things happening. And there's a part where you're actually deciding, getting them to sign the papers and write the checks and do those things. So if we just use those general ideas, and I will tell you, Mike and I have had this conversation lots of times. You can call the stages measure them by past tense things that have happened. You can measure them by things that are actively happening. You could call them a lot of different things. And that's a whole nother conversation for Mike and I to have another day, or Mike and me to have another day. But yeah, Brandon, why don't you start?
So, I'm going to go with completely neutral stages, because I think there's one metrics that needs to be part of every stage, which is stage velocity, right? How long does a deal sit in each stage before advancing? Is it stalling? Is it dying? Like, what's moving forward? And how do we compare each active deal to our historical average for each stage? I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. So I think, in no matter what stage we're in, the success of that stage and if we were successfully moving it forward, the time it takes to get through that stage, I think is the core, the core metric, I would say, right, that we have to look at regardless of what stage we're talking about.
I think it's super important. And I think that there's two things that we want to think about when we're thinking about velocity. One is this particular deal going at a different pace for a reason?
Right.
And or slower. And that, is there different velocity at different stages? But I think then there's this other thing is, do different salespeople, are their velocities different? And is there a problem? Are some going too fast and are some going too slow? Are some missing steps? Are some dragging things out that shouldn't drag out that long? So this velocity thing matters. Does it take longer in some industries than it takes in others? Does it take longer with deals we already have done business with before versus brand new deals? Like, these kinds of measures tell us a lot.
And what happens when a champion leaves? What does that do to the velocity of that step? Is it taking us backwards, right? Like, there are a lot of, outside triggers and effects that are going to affect that velocity. But for me, when I'm talking about, is this a successful campaign, whatever you're going to call from, they're all campaigns in my head, right? Is it a successful campaign? It really is, where did it get stuck? Why did it get stuck? On average, how long should that have taken to move forward? And we need to look at why and measure, what would the ideal, what is our benchmark for each of these stages? And then what do we do when there's an obstacle that's slowing down that stage? And what you said that I didn't think of, because I love that, is if they're going too fast through the stage, are we missing objections that we should have uncovered at a different stage, right? So are we maybe moving too fast and then missing key elements? I'm audio reading this book. I just want to give it a shout out. I know there are lots of authors everywhere and there are lots of great books. At the moment, it is the greatest book, called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And they talk. Randy Illig is it's a guy that I know well. He's the author, and I've been talking to him a lot, so I'm like, I better read his book. But he talks about, we all understand red lights and green lights, right? If there's a red light, it's an objection we have to overcome. If it's a green light, we know we can move on to the next stage. But it's the yellow lights that we often miss. And so I think if the sale is going too quickly, yellow lights, I'm just going to share this and then I'll move on. But one of the examples in the book, at least I'm going to get close, it won't be exact, is the sales rep missed that the buyer used to work at that sales rep's competitor. So he has relationships at that other, that's a yellow light that was not discussed. So this velocity of this deal kept going on, and really the yellow light was, why are you even talking to us if you have relationships over there, right? So the conversation, the whole thing got stalled because of other relationships, and those are yellow lights that we have to be hyper aware of in order to make sure that we are moving through the right pace, not too fast, not too slow, baby bear pace, just right pace, right? But we have to know what that is.
So I'm going to jump in on Bryn's point. I'm going to be generic.
I just love that. We get three people trying to talk at the same time.
And I'll shut up. I'll be very, very fast. I'm focusing on the keyword of momentum, right? What critical things have to happen at each stage to show momentum. And what I see often at every single stage is, how frequently am I engaging with the buyer, and how wide am I engaging with the buyers? So I see too many reps get just one person, one champion, and they just glue onto them and never broaden. So Bryn talked about, all of a sudden, that the champion comes in here and changes their mind. Well, if you'd have got in front of the whole buying committee, one person at a time, you would have known that. You would have seen some yellow lights. You would have been able to have a better strategy, keep the momentum going. The other part I see a lot of reps letting the buyer drive the pace. And while I respect that, as a buyer myself, many a time, it's up to you to also drive the pace. You have to get in front of them on a regular basis. And too many people are afraid to do it and push it and make sure there's always conversations or touching going on to keep it top of mind. So frequency of touch and breadth of touch. Then I'll shut up.
I think both of you contributed to something. I'll just back us up just a little bit to say, we're talking stages, and we're talking about how to keep momentum. I'll go back to one of those terms that I used in an earlier podcast. Borrowed metrics come into play here, and are you matching to the market goes into play here too. Do your go-to-market motions, whether it's your marketing or your sales, your customer success, all of those things, do they match how your buyers buy? And do your stages reflect that? So for instance, if you aren't going deep or wide enough in your example, Daryl, do you need a stage that is addressed a buying committee, right? Should that be something that's built in as a stage? For other places, it shouldn't. So it happens in marketing too. Like, you end up with these borrowed metrics where you're like, awareness, consideration, research, intent. You have a lot of things that you could throw around, but some things move quickly. Some things, once people have awareness around the right intent, they move really quickly. So putting in a lot of stages around that on the marketing side could miss the opportunity to get people to sales faster, right? Some move slower and you're sending them too fast. And therefore you end up with this misalignment between sales and marketing, where sales is like, oh, these are crap leads. Well, they're crap leads because you called them too soon, right? So it's that same thing. So is your sales process, your go-to-market process, matching the buyer process for your market? And what are the stages where you both are aligned? And then I think it's perfectly fair, Bryn, to say, what's the outlier in the pace now, right? And you aren't waiting on the buyer to set the pace, or that because you're kind of matching to it, you can find the outliers and find the levers that you can touch.
Renee, if I had a company, I'd hire you.
I think we do really well together, Bryn.
I do. I think you're brilliant.
I'm pretty sure you do have a company.
Oh, if I had a real company, not my lifestyle company.
Oh, you have a real company.
It's a real company. I love my company.
See,
I love
Liz,
my.
what do you
Brilliant.
think?
Actually, you're saying I'm brilliant, but really, for the most part, all I'm saying is listen to the market. Listen to the market. Listen to the market.
But you say it in such a smart way.
Mike, what do I think about Bryn's company, or what do I think about?
Well, either one of those, both Brent's company and the stage challenge that we're talking through.
So I think Bryn does have a company,
I do.
and I think that what keeps going through my head as I'm listening to this conversation is um, track and field and hurdles, right? So if you're running around the track, there are hurdles that come up along the way. And along that journey, you have to jump those hurdles. If you don't jump the hurdles and clear the hurdle, you have a problem. You either fall and skin your knees, or you knock over the hurdle, or you slow your pace, or whatever other things could happen. And I think that as we're thinking through all of these things, we're thinking through velocity, we're thinking through stages and how many stages you need to have and what you need to name them. We're thinking through what has to happen, who has to be spoken to, what things have to occur. We've got to kind of think about this hurdle analogy, which is if I'm going to get from the beginning to the end in the time that I need to get there without skinning my knees, how am I going to do that successfully? And I think that, so when we're starting to think about hurdles, this is, Mike, what you often talk about. Have you cleared that hurdle? If you've cleared that hurdle, then you can start on the next stage. And I think that as we're thinking about what we're measuring, whether we're talking about KPIs, whether we're talking about momentum, any of these things, we have to think about what are the hurdles that have to be cleared, and how do I make sure that everyone has cleared them successfully in order to close the deals we need to close.
I just like that you use cleared and past tense, because that might mean that you're coming along on.
I'm not, Mike.
No, I know. I'm just using your words. So I think the thing, there are a couple of things that have come up in the conversation, and just to summarize each of those, so that like there's nothing new except what has been forgotten, and some of this is just a repeat of what the team here has said. Have a definition. So have the name of a stage. Have a definition of the stage. If you're going to use in progress criteria, then have an entrance criteria for going into the stage. If you're going to use past tense, then have exit criteria for exiting the stage. And those they can work. They will work hand in hand with each other. Know the job to be done of the process that you're working through. If you're forecasting, don't use buyer behavior for forecasting, because it's going to be too hard to forecast accurately inside your business, given what you know about your business. If you're actually using it to align with what the buyer does and what the customer does, use customer journey language on that side and experience language on that side, and try to be careful about how they overlap with each other or interact with each other. And remember that anytime that you want to make something change, and Daryl knows this because his team made it in the playoffs a little bit longer than my team, you need to have friction. So there has to be friction on the ice in order for the puck to change direction, or for a player to change direction. So friction is okay in your process. Don't implement unnecessary friction just for the sake of putting it in there because somebody said that you needed to do it. I think, unfortunately, we waste so much time inside organizations on these kind of conversations because we we focus on our opinions, or we focus on our specific experience, or we focus on how we would do it, which is where Renee has hit the mark multiple times over the course of the conversation today. Your buyer has a vote. Your business will not succeed based on you buying from yourself, unless you just happen to have internal customers inside your business and your managed service for your specific business. It's your buyer has a vote, so make sure you're giving the time, energy, and space for that vote to be cast and implemented into the stuff that you're doing.
So I think that sort of the wrapping up thought in all of this is name your stages, choose your names. It doesn't matter. Measure the right things. Make sure that you, in naming your stages, in setting the hurdles that have to be jumped, everyone is in agreement and fully understands. Understand how long each stage should take. Understand what your buyer needs in order to be successful. Once you begin to do this and you can name things and measure momentum and measure progress, you can have conversations about what's happening and how to improve it, and you can make changes. But if we're all speaking a different language, if we're all following a different process, if we all think different things are important and we behave differently and we ignore what our buyer is telling us, the journey that our sellers are on is going to be a nightmare. And our seller's journey is as important as our buyer's journey. They need to align and work together to get the results that we need them to get. Renee, what were you going to say?
I was just going to add one important practical tidbit. I like to always offer something very practical versus theoretical too. I do a lot of customer journey mapping. And I will say there's a huge gap in most organizations where they think they have their customer journey mapped. And this happens often one of two ways. Many people start that mapping and that experience with when someone is sold, which is only part, as you would all recognize with all of your experience in sales. The other one is that they will start it with when sales enters into the conversation, which is still missing a huge chunk of the experience. And that is from the beginning and awareness. If you aren't optimizing for momentum and figuring out the things that are driving momentum into those stages, into sales and into becoming a customer, you're missing the beginnings, the things that start your flywheel, right? And you're also missing ways to drive energy back in, to drive more people in. So consider I use buyer journey a lot because it helps people think pre-customer, right? Consider the full buyer and customer journey and all of it when you were looking for it. When you talk about the hurdles, Liz, there are many that happen before someone gets to sales. And if you aren't looking at those, then, people have already switched lanes to the lane with less hurdles before you ever get to sales, and you wouldn't ever recognize it. The same as if you only measure it starting at customer. And I get it. Sometimes you got to work your way backwards to what you know, but too many people are ignoring those early stages. And that's where a lot is lost and won.
And we could have an entire day just talking about that journey and how to measure it and how to understand it and how to improve it. It's important. It's really important.
Even documenting it to start, right? Like, what are all the things that they go through?
Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts on this before we wrap up? All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. All right. And the last one, I want to talk about CRMs, but we could also talk about AI in this conversation. So does my CRM actually track progress? And the second part of that question is, I don't care if it tracks progress as much as does it help create momentum? Does it help my sales team create momentum in the process? So I asked, I wrote it down as, does it actually track progress? But that's only half the journey, right?
It's one of the two jobs of the CRM, right?
So hang on to that thought and let's talk about that. Yeah.
I have 10 minutes, so
yes.
I'll say I'm going to talk and leave.
All right. I'll let you start.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. She comes late, she leaves early. We'll keep
I
it
know. I'm very diva like that.
That's what we all say about you.
I know. That's the plan, man. I was a
Yeah.
geek in high school, so like to be able to, make up for it a little. No, I'm kidding. Anyway.
Before we started and you weren't here, Mike was like, "Where's the diva?" So
He totally said that.
That's exactly what I said.
I was channeling your energy.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't remember the last time I ever used the word diva. So
Diva.
I've been thrown under the bus, Brad.
The bottom line is I'm still the geek from high school, but I like to pretend.
All right, are you guys ready?
I'm still in high school.
Oh God, never again. All right. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Daryl Prowl, Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and Bryn Tillman. And we've been talking a lot this last 4 episodes about how do you know if your team is on track? And that kind of leads to this other question, which is how do you keep them on track? So we're going to talk today about CRMs, and I want to add into this AI in your CRM, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But how is your CRM accurately tracking the progress, the momentum toward closed deals? And is it doing anything to help you maintain that momentum and close more deals? So let's start with the first question. And we're going to lead off with Bryn because she's got to leave us early in this conversation. But is our CRM doing its job? Is it tracking?
The answer is probably not, right? Like very few CRMs are effective. However, I do have my little tip that is not going to answer your question directly, but I think the best thing that AI can do with CRMs is connect. Like if you have your co-pilot connected to your Teams, connected to your CRM, every single transcript from every single call should get logged into the CRM. And I'm watching that happen now. And from that, we can gather an enormous amount of insights. And because it's not even what the rep is putting in anymore. It's actual data that we can pull from. So that is I am not the greatest of CRM people. Anyone that says the word CRM, I'm like, oh, Liz Hyman, like that's the trigger word for me. Because I don't do a lot with that. I can say here are a couple KPIs for LinkedIn that you put in your CRM, but I do know AI in the CRM, one of the best things you can do is connect your Teams, Copilot, transcript thingy majobbers to your CRM. That would be my tip for the day.
And I would add to that, don't put the full transcript in. Have your AI clean it up a little bit so it's actually useful when you go to get it.
Even better. All right, my friends.
Ciao. Have a good weekend, Bryn. All right, so as our CRM doing the work it was designed to do?
So, Liz, I think here's one I see often, and again, because I'm not managing it, I'm not in sales, so I'm not sitting there managing my deals through the CRM. The CRM has another job too, and that is to be a database for the information and the data that drives decisions in your organization. So you have 2 jobs happening. One is, does it make it easier for your sales team to move deals through and close business and manage that business once it's closed? And then is it also helping us collect, organize, get visibility into the data that drives our business? Marketing is going to touch a couple of those on the sales side, and it's going to touch a lot in the data that we're able to extract from it and use and inform for decisions. So one of the problems that comes up with CRMs right now, and the reason I find, this is my opinion, but the reason I find they're so unpopular is putting the people who need to be closing deals on the job of managing data creates working on a software more than the software working for the business, if that makes sense. So that's where I tend to find that people feel like the CRM is not really doing everything they need to do because they have people that need to be closing deals in charge of data so that other people can make decisions and then the deals slow down. So finding a way for it to do both of those jobs well is much harder than the way most CRMs are put it. That's my opinion.
Well, and I would agree. And I think Daryl and Mike will agree too. How many salespeople really love using the CRM and filling in the information?
They all love it.
It's their favorite part of the day. It's my favorite part of my day, actually.
Yes.
I just love having to open up the CRM and put stuff in, right?
Best time ever.
Okay, so then
Renee's
what,
going,
Daryl?
cool.
So then what? What do we do?
Well, so the question is, does my CRM actually track progress? So short answer is yes, sure, it tracks progress. The who, the what. But I guess the question is that what you want? I mean, sure, you want to see progress through all the various stages. You want to make sure that there's sufficient activity taking place, all the usual stuff, that they're talking to people with a regular frequency and cadence, that they're not, ignoring an account, all the usual stuff. Yes, the CRM will track that progress. However, if your goal is rather to say, I want to track the progress so then I can have intelligence. I want to know which deals are at risk. I want to know who, what hot buttons I should be hitting. I want to know a more real version of the forecast. I want to look at all those subtle signs. Then that's where AI comes in. And there are specialist tools out there that can do that for you too. Maybe Clary comes to mind. I'm not a Clary expert. But I guess the question comes, does it track my progress? Yes. What's your goal? To me, you need a CRM regardless. Even if it's only as simple, because I've seen, and I'm sure Renee's the expert here, folks, by the way. If you haven't checked her out, check her out. But you see a lot of people going to a lot of tech ecosystems where I'm going to have hockey stack, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have Clay, I'm going to have, whatever. And it becomes a hodgepodge. You still need the CRM. It's got to be the central database. Some people rely on the CRM. That's core. Others rely on this hodgepodge ecosystem. That's not where I'm going. Where I'm going is you still need the CRM always to track the progress. But is that your goal? If that's your goal, the CRM doesn't do a great job of that right now. I'm sure it's going to change. This is where Renee says, Daryl, you're an idiot, and let me correct you. And I'd be okay with that.
No, I think a lot of people feel like it doesn't do it right now. And I think it's because that problem, like we're trying to do both, get the same people to do both jobs. And it's hard in its current incarnation, right? As AI helps more with getting things into fields and structuring the data and doing the work that you're trying to ask salespeople to be data people, essentially, as we abstract away some of those pieces, I think it will get much better because we aren't relying on that mismatch.
The one thing I will say here too, I want to emphasize this, is when you look at tracking progress, and Liz is hit on this. I know the last episode she talked about all the various stages, and she said, you had marketing, and then you had all the various prospecting and all the various stages of sales. And yes, I did notice she had one stage for all of marketing and a lot of stages for sales. But I didn't say anything because I'm a better player than that.
No, I did say you might have more for marketing. I just put it in the context. That's right. No, you're right, though.
That doesn't help my story. So just so you go, don't let the facts get in the way. But yeah, Renee, you nailed it. I mean, they don't do a great job of it. And at the end of the day, both a sales rep or a marketing leader or a sales leader, the progress is a check mark. We're going to look at it. But at the end of the day, what we want is the insight. We want the intelligence. That's what we want. So we know how to action. So whether it be tools like Gong or otherwise, we talked about, that's dynamite. Before I have my one-on-one, give me the quick and dirty before I sit down with this rep, because I'm running from meeting to meeting to meeting. What deals are at risk? What deals haven't been touched? Where do they see stalled? And yes, I'm going to ask them. Mike's got a very good approach to one-on-ones. He can talk about it again. He's talked about it in past podcasts, but I want that intelligence so I can optimize my time when I'm having these progress reviews. But I want to hear what Mike says. He looks very contemplative.
Yes.
What is the CRM? Like, what's the acronym?
Customer Relationship Management.
Customer Relationship Management. Okay. So it's supposed to manage the relationships that we have with our customers, right? And to Renee's point, when I'm implementing these tools, and I've been fortunate enough to do it for a while, when I'm implementing these tools, one of my core beliefs is the technology should work for the human should not work for the technology. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that's how I structure them and build them. So if it's a customer relationship management tool and the technology should work for the human, not the human working for the technology, then I don't know what the evolution of the CRM is or where it goes as we move along. Today, we've allowed so much scope creep because the CRM is now our marketing automation tool. Because Salesforce bought Pardot and bolted it into the system, or no, it's our call intelligence tool because Einstein is amazing at capturing all of the notes and call recordings and all of that other kind of stuff. And we just keep trying to make it we've tried to make the CRM the toolbox instead of the tool. And when you do that, yes, a Swiss Army knife can do some really cool things. It is not the thing that people use when they're working on cars. Unless they just happen to be in the field and it's the only tool that they have available to them. So does it actually track progress in the way that a project management tool is designed to do? No. Can it do parts of it? Sure, if you've instrumented it properly. I think the CRM is going to go the way of a lot of these other systems. You're going to have a database of information, and that data is going to be captured in whatever way, shape, or form it gets captured, and it's going to be put into a warehouse or a lake, and it's going to be integrated in there. And then you're going to have tools that have access to be able to extract the pieces of information out when and where it needs those pieces of information. And as they go through and extract the information, they're going to have to deal with the combination of both structured and unstructured data and naming conventions in different languages and all that other kind of stuff to help deal with things that machines are much better at dealing with than people. Because the way that we did this back in the day with Excel is we'd use things like VLOOKUP and concatenate and pivot tables, and we'd change the titles of fields and do all of that other kind of stuff. And now the machines can do that a lot faster. So I don't know if the CRM really needs to be the thing that manages or reports back on progress. I think, unfortunately, we've made it do that thing because leadership needs it to do it. Somebody in RevOps decided to go build it out the way that they sold, even though they never sold. But somebody who did sell told them that this is how sales works, even though that person hasn't been in the field for a while. So I don't think the CRM manages or is an indicator of progress. And I think it's getting worse.
I think there are some things that are very positive that are happening right now. I have a hope that we no longer have the whole team managing the CRM, that we have a couple of people managing it, because we aren't asking our team to handle structuring data, that we make it very easy for them to do it. I am very optimistic about audio contributing to this and being able to match your structured data with audio where people can speak to the CRM in English, and the CRM can, the intelligence behind the CRM can structure that data for them rather than them having to rather than us having to build exact fields and tell them exactly where to do this and do that and make sure it goes here, not there, and all of that, right? So I think that is one very positive move, especially with salespeople who are often away from a computer. One of the things that they despise is having to log into that computer and do data entry, essentially.
Or do data entry on their phone.
Yeah, either one, like having to log into something to do it, where they could essentially manage that as a phone call. As they finish one call or one meeting and go into another, they could just, update the CRM like they would be updating a sales assistant that they, we're going way back, right? Like they would have done back then. Another one that I'm very optimistic about is using intelligence to help us eliminate blind spots. I've worked with several industries in the past few years where their market has a turnover rate of 30 to 40% of their buyers, where the turnover rate is 30 to 40%. And that is a massive data gap inside their databases. By the time, especially if they have an annual sales cycle, by the time they're starting, the role may have even changed over twice. So by the time they're starting that conversation again. So there are tools that are helping now that I've connected into some of my clients' accounts that are super helpful. Again, just because I had the knowledge that it existed and saw the data gap that they have. I am not the CRM expert, but when I see gaps that we can help fix, we'll jump in and do it. And one of them is getting into tools like Apollo or Clay or some of these other tools that can recognize when people have changed jobs, that can also recognize when jobs are listed available in an account. If we can surface actionable data like that to our sales team so that they can address it much faster and they can keep that relationship going, I think we do get closer, Mike, to what you're talking about, is a tool that helps us maintain a relationship with our customer, right? But those are kind of newer versions of tools. And I think looking for where your gaps are and where your frustrations and friction points are, and how can we work to do that better. As Bryn said, transcripts can do a lot, because inside of a transcript, if you train for the data you need in the call you're in, how to get the data you need in the call you're in, you can do a trick that I do with transcripts, which is essentially make sure that the AI has everything called out. I'll say things like, so if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is whatever, and there's the summary that the AI can now go pull, right? And it understands how to do that. So there are a lot of things that we can do that will finally, I think, bring out more of the relationship in CRM and the customer relationship part. But it has been very painful till now, because we're basically asking the people who are managing relationships to become data entry clerks.
And they hate it. I think there's
do you guys use call recorders?
I was, and then my recorder did something really frightening, and I turned it off and I think I'm going to switch to Fathom. But
What did it do?
What
did it do?
It did two things. I forget which one I was using. I was trying to remember. It actually, anybody who was registered to be on the call, it sent the transcript to automatically. And I was in a call with a client, and there were a bunch of people listed on this call. There were like 20 people, and there were actually about 6 people in the call. And they were talking about a client, and they started trash talking the client, and I made them stop. Like, we have a problem. You need to turn off my call recorder, because I can't, because I don't have control of the meeting. And you need to make sure that nobody is in this meeting. You need to stop and look at that list and make sure there's no one in your client list that is in that meeting. And after it did that, I stopped using it. I was scared. I was like, never do I want to be in a position like that with a client. The other thing it did was, one of my clients wanted to read the transcript, and it forced them to sign up in order to do that. And then it started automatically going to every one of their meetings. Then they were going to meetings with government. They were government contractor. And so they were going to meetings with government agencies, and it was creating problems with them because they didn't know how to turn it off or tell it not to do it. So I stopped using it, but I think I'm going to start using Fathom. Like, it should not be doing things like that to us. Right?
How about you guys, Daryl, Renee? Do you guys use call recorders?
I've used a whole bunch, some not by choice. And that this is a conversation I've had with some of my some of my how do I describe this? Some of my fellow executive leaders within organizations. Um, is I want to use one tool, like Granola, as an example, right, or Whisperflow or something. Um, Whereas they would rather I use the tools built in. So I want to use the Zoom, or I want to use Google Meets, or I want to use Slack. And I'm like, my whole point here is I want a master system of record. I don't want 4 different systems of record. And so if I want to go and find a certain conversation, I can go do that. And sometimes there's some IT security concerns, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, I've used Granola, I've used Whisperflow, and then I've used the tools in Zoom, I've used the tools in Slack, I've used the tools in Google Meet, and they work well. Like, all of them work well. I don't necessarily have a problem with them, but to me, it's a workflow issue, not necessarily just a tool issue.
What's your point, Mike? Are you asking?
He's just asking.
How about you, Renee? Do you use them or no?
I do when it's the appropriate type of meeting and with permission.
I think so. My point is, well, I don't use them. I've never used
Okay.
them. I have been in a number of different meetings where people use them, and I ask them if they want to keep them in. Many times the call recorder shows up before the people that I'm meeting with. And when that happens, I have fun and just start recording stuff just for the sake of them being late to the meeting. I think the recorder creates a barrier of friction that does not serve the purpose of creating a relationship. I think it gets in the way of creating the genuine relationship that you can create when you ask the question. Like I used to ask, "Do you mind if I take notes?" when sitting across from a customer, like at a desk where we're at, or at a table in a room where you ask that question. And I think the call recorders are creating more waste. Like we talk about sustainability, but we are going to continue to capture and put all of this data into systems and not really know exactly what or how that data is going to be used. So I guess the question I would ask, my point on this is, if you are using a call recorder, what purpose does it serve inside your business? How are you actually using the data? Go back to some of the things that were discussed over the course of a couple of these today. Ask, what, so what, now what, relative to the information you're capturing. And maybe that recording of information is not the actual thing that you need to do. What you need to do is improve how your team gathers information from your customers and then organizes that information so that they can return it back to the customer. Maybe it's helping the team get better at their own individual note taking. These AI tools are so good now that I can take a picture of the whiteboard, and the tool will summarize what I've organized on the whiteboard, or will summarize my notes, or put together a description of what was actually discussed. Based on the color coding I use, it will highlight what the next steps are. The technology is getting better. Use the technology to enable you to do better things. Don't use the technology as a
so that was my point, though, Mike, at the beginning when Bryn said record and save those notes into your CRM. No, don't do that. Record it, have your AI summarize it into some critical points, have your AI decide who's doing what next actions, get the AI to put those next actions into your calendar and into your CRM, get the AI to put the critical points from your meeting into your CRM. But just having a bunch of transcripts from the 50 calls you do a day, as you're right, it's just a lot of information. What's anybody going to do with it?
It gets
So
you
hold
further
on,
away from
hold
customer
on.
relationship management.
This is the exact example of if a CRM has a lot of data that a company can use versus how a CRM helps sales move forward. For the salesperson, I 100% agree with you, Liz, that would be drowning in noise versus signal. Give me the signal, help me move forward. What will help me move forward? I'm going to tell you what another department is going to do with that transcript, though. In marketing, one of the biggest problems we have is speaking in the words and the voice of our customer so that they recognize what we're trying to say to them. And we often end up with too much lingo. And this comes from salespeople too, right? We use too much lingo. We aren't reflecting. We aren't getting to the real. We aren't getting back into the messaging what the real issues are. And those transcripts can be used by your marketing team to help them form messaging, to do campaigns, to make sure that we're speaking in the voice that our customer uses, and that we're pulling out specific objections. We're pulling out specific things to help us understand our target persona better, right? Those transcripts can do many jobs that aren't just sales. You can also get it for the customer success side, can do the same thing. One of the most frustrating things that will happen is you complete a sale, turn them over to onboarding, move them to customer success, and now the customer has to start and tell their story all over again, right? So what you would pull out in your summary for a salesperson from that same transcript would be completely different than what marketing would use it for, or what the customer success team would use it for. Or if you have, like a customer service team for like technical support or things like that, then they can mine that same lake of data in a transcript for different things. Like, what are people saying they don't understand, or what are they confused about, or whatever, right? So that's a perfect example of, is the data for the business or is the data for sales, right? And if we're using a CRM as the main North Star metric with all the data for a business, and a lot of mid-market firms do this. They don't have an ERP. They don't have these other things. The CRM is the largest database inside that company. Then those are pieces of information that get used for multiple things. But to your point right now, it's making too much noise instead of signal for sales, which actually runs out of the CRM. The other departments use the CRM and the data inside of it. Sales runs outside of it. And that's that two job functionality that's causing a lot of muddiness.
Here's the challenge, though, from my perspective. And again, I'm a weird fucking dude. Excuse me. I understand. I think differently about this stuff. There was a time and place where, as a sales professional, you invited your colleague in marketing to a conversation with the customer. And the reason why you invited your colleague from marketing is your colleague from marketing could ask a question that sounds completely different than you asking that question. And at the same time, you get the information that you need to help marketing communicate better with the broader customers. So you learn and you actually align as a team. And we would do this with success too. We would actually have pre-implementation calls with customers before a deal was done. Typically, for me, it'd be after fit has been established or in that area, but you'd have those conversations. And now all of a sudden you start to solve for the challenge of everybody working in these silos, looking at the data, describing it in the same way that 5 blind people describe an elephant. And so much of it is driven by the way their perspective and their perception. When you show the customer that your team is much bigger than the one person that's there, and that they deeply care, then you can actually trade people with your customer, so they bring other resources into that conversation. I understand. I've been fortunate enough to work in enterprise sales, complex sales environments across some very large organizations. This stuff works both at the SMB level and the very large side. The biggest challenge is we're not communicating with each other. We're not all part of the same conversation. We're having conversations that are happening in silos, and then we're reading the news about it, hoping to interpret it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just completely fucked up.
Well, Mike, I would never say that a transcript should take the place of an in-person opportunity for people to connect ever, right? Like, this is just additional data that can be put to use that is scale. Like I may be able to go with a sales team. I may be able to go on 10 calls in a month with a sales team, but I still got to do marketing stuff too, right? So I've got to have more than those 10 conversations for input. This allows me to get that scale. It allows me to find information that I didn't cover in those 10. I would never say you shouldn't do the in-person things. I think the human experience and intrapersonal is going to be even more valued, but it does give us, again, going back to what is the role of the CRM, if all of that is available to use and the team who needs to use it can pull out signal from the noise, which is, I think, the biggest problem now, that it becomes more valuable.
So I want to kind of wrap this up with more talking about the CRM and does it really track what we need it to track? And we started today 3 episodes ago talking about KPIs and are they measuring the right things? And kind of wrapping up with, does our CRM measure momentum? Does it measure our progress toward our end goals? And I would say some CRMs probably do it better than others. And all of these other things we've talked about, how AI can be used, how we can pull information from transcripts, all of these kinds of things are impacting that. I've been playing with a CRM called Membrane lately, and I'm really having fun because it allows me to track and measure things that I haven't been able to easily track and measure in some of the other CRMs that I'm using. I'm not saying it's the only CRM that does this, but it's got some AI built into it, and it helps you build metrics into it. So it can start to do things for the team and for the individual salesperson that look like having a checklist in there for, is this qualified or not qualified? So an actual place to say, yeah, this is a 9 versus an 8 versus a 7. How qualified is this lead, or is this company as an ideal prospect? So you can add, it happens in there in a way that's more natural. It also can start to say, well, we know that we should be talking to 10 people in a sale by the time we get to this point, for instance, and it can say, how healthy is this deal? This deal is only a 5 because you've only talked to 2 people, or it's a 1 because you're doing my guy selling again. You're only talking to 1 person. So it begins to put in these other things in the process to help us measure what's the health, what are the other activities that need to happen to get it healthy again, what is the likelihood it will close based upon whether we've done certain things along the way, based upon our experiences of, have we jumped all the hurdles? Have we cleared all the hurdles? And so I'm really having a good time with it. It also tracks a ton of information. It has an entire component that talks about large accounts and managing information in there and tracking momentum across the relationship of that large account. So I'm really having fun, and I'm seeing that you can have CRMs built to give you a better idea of where you actually are, and also help the salesperson do the things that they might forget to do, or need nudging on, or giving them ideas. So that this idea of the CRM being a static place to store information is evolving. And Mike, whether we're doing this with AI going into an entire lake of data and pulling stuff out, or whether we're doing it within the CRM, these are all interesting questions that talk about, does the CRM, or does this idea of a database that helps us check the health, check our forecasts for accuracy, and also help the salesperson be more successful. That's exciting to me that we're making momentum as an industry in that direction.
I'm so excited. You just said there was a CRM that was fun. I'm going to go check it out.
I said I'm having fun with it. I don't know that any CRM is actually fun, but I'm having fun playing with it and figuring out how to set it up to actually do more for the salespeople
without needing a developer. Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts before we wrap up today? Hey, everybody,
Good
thanks.
conversation.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. We'll see you next time. Happy selling, everyone.